Gentlemen, this is Action Line with Bill Ozard.
920 CJCH.
Good morning, it's 8:32 on the Action Line, the 21st day of July. Be that as it may, let's discuss something that I think is important this morning and like to seek your opinions. This evening at City Council session in Halifax, a number of important issues will be discussed, amongst them the application to rezone Quinpool Road, Roby Street area to build a 17-story hotel, and undoubtedly there'll be many questions asked about that. One thing that I think that will be discussed tonight, to my knowledge, unless it gets postponed because of the heavy agenda, is that of the whole future of historic buildings in Halifax. Halifax is 225 years old in round figures and has a rich history of maritime lore and a rich history of shipping and warehousing, and there are many magnificent old buildings on the Halifax waterfront. Still, many have gone under the wrecker's hammer. There is a move afoot now with the Landmarks Commission, which is a city-appointed commission with such enthusiastic volunteers as Gil Hutton and Lou Collins, who have, through their Landmarks Commission, called for tenders for the refurbishing of a number of historic buildings in the lower Water Street area. Those of you who have traveled that part of the city, which is virtually on the waterfront, know that there are many buildings in the probably 150 to 200 year age bracket that are still in relatively good repair, that with imagination and architectural skill could be made into beautifully refurbished buildings with modern conveniences inside for offices, boutiques, stores, etc., but at the same time maintain that wonderful old character that they have on the outside. And a number of proposals have been received already to virtually create, if you want, an old quarter in the city of Halifax, using the essential elements of these old buildings as the basis for a new shopping area, if you will, that would include stores, offices, etc., and walk, maybe even malls and so on. The actual presentations have not been made public as yet, and so we can only guess as to what the various developers have in mind. On the other side of the coin are those people who wish to improve the traffic conditions in the city, particularly in the downtown core area, who are suggesting the construction of a highway system, if you will, which is called, for want of a better name, Harbour Drive. It is proposed that eventually, perhaps, some kind of arterial feeder system will run along the Halifax waterfront, virtually cutting a swath through these old buildings. Most of them, if not all of them, will have to be torn down or seriously impaired with or interfered with when construction, if construction begins at some time in the future, of this expressway, if you wish to call it that. I believe personally that the city of Halifax now has a Spadina Expressway controversy on its hands, but people are not grasping, I don't believe, the gravity of the issue. It's the very issue as to whom do we succumb? The high-speed expressway builders and dreamers, or to those people who wish to preserve some of our historic sites and to show to our young people particularly, and to show to ourselves that there are things permanent in this life, that there were things of beauty that were built in the 1800s, that everything isn't flashy steel, concrete, reinforced brackets, and chrome. And it seems to me that we, as citizens of Halifax, should be getting up on our hind legs and fighting for the preservation of what few historic buildings we have left. I am personally not a supporter of 4-lane or 6-lane expressways cutting through the city from one side to the other, from, say, the future Arm Bridge, swirling around the south end and up the north end, joining the Angus L. MacDonald Bridge or the Narrows Bridge or some other kind of circumferential arrangement. It seems to me that the city should be designed for the people and not for the automobile. And if we allow ourselves to be surrounded with expressways and interchanges, and we allow at the same time the destruction of beautiful historic buildings in the name of quote-unquote progress, we are just going to become another cheap city without any tradition or history at all. And this morning we seek your opinions on this morning on whether you think we as citizens should fight for the preservation of historic buildings in this city and fight the encroachment of the automobile on our lives, on our society, through expressways and interchanges that will slice up our city virtually and will, in the process, destroy many of our old historic buildings on the Halifax waterfront in particular. What do you think this morning? The action line on CJCH Radio, 454-9308, is our telephone number as we talk about this morning historic buildings in Halifax and indeed the province. We don't have to confine ourselves to Halifax or to Dartmouth or, for that matter, to the metropolitan area. We could talk about the province. How many historic buildings have we lost that we will, of course, never see again? Buildings that have tremendous tradition attached to them, that are a symbol of the sacrifices that our predecessors made to make this province what it is today. And it seems to me that we have a very cavalier attitude towards things old, that we've been sucked in by many developers, many architects, many city fathers, not only here but in other parts of our country, that everything in the name of progress is right. That is, the big super expressways, the 6-lane jobs that cut through cities, etc., the big interchanges and so on. I'm not suggesting that we stay into single-lane or 2-lane highway systems and so on, but it's extremely important that there be balance in the development of our road systems, and I believe particularly in the cities, and in our city of Halifax. And this morning we want to find out whether you have given it any thought at all, or whether you really care at all, whether old buildings, old historic buildings like the one that Morse's Tea is currently housed in. There's a couple of the warehouses down there that are in a sad state of repair but could be saved if it was allowed. If you go down Lower Water Street in that particular area, there are just on both sides of the street buildings that are 150, 200 years old that have had a long history in this city, or involved with this city. And with the advent or with the advocacy of Harbour Drive expressways and so on, many of these historic buildings will disappear. And it seems to me that if we allow the so-called technocrats of this life to carry on totally all by themselves, we won't have anything historic left. I don't want to sound cynical or even silly, but if we may wake up one morning and find out that they decided to run an expressway right through Joe Howe's navel at Province House and through the front lobby of Province House or something, and that the building must go, and why don't we build a modern Province House made of anodized aluminum and tinted glass, more fitting to our modern traditions or something like that. And that sounds a little cynical and perhaps a little silly, but I'm saying it only to illustrate that if we as citizens do not take stands ourselves and pride in historic buildings and insist to our city fathers and those who develop on our behalf that we want to preserve these traditional buildings, they'll all be sooner or later torn down. Do you care? How many citizens in Halifax have a sense of tradition? How many of you care about the older buildings that are here, that are part of your history, particularly those of you who are long time or who have always been residents of Halifax? I am, in terms of most Maritimers, a bloody upstart from Upper Canada. I've only lived here for 11 years. But I've chosen to make it my home and my family's home, and I'm concerned, quite frankly, about the attitude that many people have towards historic buildings. And we'd like to get your opinions. Is there anybody there? Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Oh, there you are, sir, having dropped the phone in my ear.
No, I'm sorry. I had to disrupt you in another area. The radio had to be turned off before I can talk with you, sir.
Okay, you're on the radio. Shoot.
Is this the powerful little Firewater, CJCH?
That's right.
Mr. Ozard, you have a very complex subject this morning involving expropriation, urban renewal, Cogswell Street Interchange, Harbour Drive, Merciful Father. How do you start? And to paraphrase my good friend Edmund Morris, I'll do it in the next extemporaneous manner. The preservation of historic buildings is something that's interested me, not as a mark of tradition, but rather something that should be retained to add something to the charm of your city. But in no way, Mr. Ozard, would I be in favor of retaining these buildings at the expense of people. What I'm saying here, if private enterprise is prepared to go to this expense, fine, I'm all for it. But in no way, based on the economy of the city and the fact that Mayor O'Brien said that we're literally broke, should the city put any money into a thing of this nature.
For what purpose, though? Just for, let's talk about those buildings down in the waterfront area as an example.
Bank, the privateer's warehouse.
Right.
I've occasion to be through these buildings many times when my good friend Joseph Simon owned that part of the privateer's warehouse where this opposite the Morse's, the privateer's warehouse, of course, is opposite Mr. Simon's place. But I've been through there at the top, and believe you me, that's going to be a very expensive proposition.
Mm-hmm.
Expensive. It must have cost a staggering sum this fire to make sure in security that the buildings weren't subject to fire hazards and so on. I'm all for this preservation of historic buildings, but Mr. Ozard, in sincerity, not at the expense, not preserving people. I'm sure that we have projects that could command much more attention on a priority basis than these buildings. I'm a great lover of history.
I agree with you. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we use city funds to preserve these buildings, but what I'm suggesting here is that we should be getting some support rally for the Landmarks Commission, who are seeking private developers' plans for the redevelopment of this area, if you will.
I'm all for it. But when I'm scared of Mr. Ozard, they're going to come with proposals and indicate that the city is going to have to come in here for at least 25%. The province may be for 25, otherwise we can't go ahead.
Well, there are funds available through the federal government. The federal government is extremely interested in the preservation of historic buildings, as you may know.
There would be a tremendous amount of money involved in the buildings down there on Water Street, and I wouldn't be at all surprised it might be $2 million. That's quite a high cost to pay for a monument. See, it reminds me of Mayor Drapeau's activity in Montreal. When he departs from office, sir, he's going to leave behind nothing but a series of monuments to what he did while he was mayor there, and that's diverting from the subject. That city under Mayor Drapeau has had the poorest record in housing for people known in the country. But we have lots of other landmarks up there that can be pointed to the fact that he had done in his time in office. Other than that, that's about it. But I want to go to another phase of this whole involvement in this downtown area. Harbour Drive, I think, in all seriousness, is beyond us. Entirely too rich for our blood. Charles Vaughan once said about the proposal from that man Osborne in England. It was a Baghdad under Timbuktu. We've got this Cogswell Street interchange, and it's a fine thing, a monument in concrete. Wonderful. Great for the Halifax Transit Service. Mr. Ozard, after 6 o'clock, that's almost a desert.
Mm-hmm.
If you could stand at Terminal Road there by the Nova Scotian Hotel and you had a weapon that could fire a bullet that could curve around corners, you can fire the whole length of Water Street, not hit anybody. This is what we're going to continue to pour money into? Planners who do not know this area come in here and make these decisions that affect the lives of thousands of people? I don't think that Harbour Drive is going to go beyond its present location, although I know that plans are laid to go as far as Gary Street with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think that we need it. I said so in '63, but of course nobody listens to the average Joe anyway. Always classed as a knocker or a nut. Now that Cogswell Street interchange stood the city, I believe, at total cost about $6 million. I think the city may be involved in there from 2 to 3. Nobody has ever come out with the full price of what it costs the citizens of the city of Halifax, and I don't think that we did receive too much for what we paid out. I think it's a disaster. It's a great thing in the daytime for a couple hours. Nobody could justify the expenditure of that amount of money for what that thing does after 6 o'clock. It does nothing. And of course, we put an awful lot of people out of business with the urban renewal, especially in that commercial area. I can think of one firm that's no longer with us in the Lakeside Memorial Park now, paying taxes in there. The Howard Grocery, wholesale grocers, they're gone. Several people have gone out of business. The old established bowling firm is gone, Connor Martell's, which was a great meeting place for sportsmen and so on. The cost of relocation for that firm was so great that they couldn't possibly undertake it. Progress, it's wonderful, but we've sure done it, or did an awful lot of damage to old established firms in the city, and we also taken homes from people for very little money in this proposed urban renewal as related to Harbour Drive.
Right, well, all I'm saying is that I'm just projecting your argument even further. Let's not totally wipe out what we have in terms of tradition and so on at the expense of people by putting in huge interchanges and expressways that just do nothing but make our city more ugly and less comfortable to live in.
Looking at the Toronto press, the new Premier of Ontario, Mr. Davis, is to be congratulated for interfering on that Spadina Expressway, that was going to really upset an awful lot of people.
Well, he stopped construction of it.
Yeah, yes, he made the decision. The Ontario Municipal Board, they went along with the idea. They rejected an appeal from the taxpayers organization, but the Premier of the province, Mr. Davis, stepped in and he put a real stop to it. And the day that automobiles become more important than people is really a sad commentary on our time.
Right.
And we've got a gigantic program here in the city to, as some of the aldermen once suggested to people who were living in the Harbour Drive area, they all need to be re-educated. I think the time has come when some aldermen need to be re-educated and look at some of their city staff. In fact, the department heads down there at the present time, some of them are an outright disaster.
All right, sir.
And let me say this.
Okay.
As regards to the expropriation in the Harbour Drive area, where they acquired an awful lot of property, people did it not under threat, but under pressure, accepted the fact that, well, we're going to have to move eventually. Did very little negotiation. The city had a captive market. And now we find that many of these expropriated properties are going to wind up into the hands of private interests. No wonder we have so much trouble in the world with people claiming that society is far from being just and is most unjust. Now, I'll say this, Mr. Ozard, in conclusion, especially with people that own modest homes. And I hope the city fathers are listening. Oh, give me a home by the side of the road and let me be a friend of man. And with that, I'll say good morning to you, sir.
All right, sir. Thanks for your call. Bye-bye. Good morning. This is the Action Line.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
I was just listening to you this morning, and they were talking about the old historic buildings that they might be torn down.
Yes.
Did you ever stop and stand and look at the old courthouse on Spring Garden Road off at the sidewalk? Just look at it.
Mm-hmm.
The front of it?
Yes.
Did you ever look at that?
Sure, lots of
Now,
times.
there's nothing in it. Surely they ain't going to tear that down, because there'll never be anything built like that in our time or the rest of the young people's time that's growing up, I don't think. The front of it has got the picture of the founder of education up over the door, and on the two posts there, chiseled right in the stone. I think his name is Plato, is it? Plato?
Mm-hmm, Plato, yes.
Name like that?
Mm-hmm.
Look, and all the rest of us all got this fancy design cut right in stone. And I shouldn't think that they should ever tear that building down. And you can go to Coburg Road a little further, and there's old houses out there, wooden houses, that's been kept in the very best of repair, and they're all fancy shingling and all fancy doings all around the front of them. It'd be a sin to tear buildings like that down, and them buildings have been well kept up and they're well looked after inside because the wealthy people owns them.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't think they should tear any buildings like them down.
Well, I would hope not. I think that probably we can't
If you ever get a chance that you can get down, you just go up Spring Garden Road. It's not very far from the corner of Barrington there, and you just stand and look at the front of the old courthouse, and you'll never see nothing like it again if they tear that down.
Right.
Nobody around here, nobody will ever see it like that again.
No, that's right.
Well, that's the reason I called you, just as a couple that I could point out, you see.
Very good, sir.
That I don't think they should ever be torn down.
Good. Thank you.
I'm getting old, but maybe I wouldn't see them very much now, but I can see them as long as I'm here.
Right.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thanks for your call, sir.
Bye.
Bye-bye. 8:59 CJCH radio time. 454-9308 is our telephone number. As we ask you the question this morning, do you think that we should make every attempt to preserve historic buildings in Halifax? Lost a number in Dartmouth, as you'll recall. You people living in Dartmouth, recently there were a number of old buildings torn down that would not be preserved or could not be preserved. The old Octagon, what do they call it? The Octagon House over in Dartmouth, which now has an apartment building on it, similar in architecture but relatively new. The old Octagon House has gone, and there are other places that have gone in Dartmouth as well as in Halifax. How many more are we going to allow to be torn down? Or do you care? Do you really care to wake up one morning and find all the historic buildings, if not many of them, gone to the wreckers, under the wrecker's hammer? Morning, this is the Action Line.
Good morning.
Yes.
I'd like to speak this morning about our historic sites here in Halifax.
Great.
Well, to tell you the truth, until you brought the subject up this morning, I never really gave it much thought. I just took for granted that they would never be torn down. Besides being a historic site, that they add charm to our city, and they're a tourist attraction as well.
Right.
I can't see any point in tearing them down. They will attract tourists. I know I worked where I met an awful lot of tourists, and this is what they commented on: our old buildings in Halifax.
Well, it seems to me that we have a tremendous opportunity here down in that Lower Water Street area where there are about a dozen of these old buildings still standing to create, with private capital, a little something or other, an old quarter, if you will, where you can walk through tradition, where these old buildings are preserved and so on, and there are little boutiques in them and offices, etc., and there are no cars. You can walk on the streets and this kind of thing. To me, a tremendous attraction.
Yeah, that's exactly what crossed my mind this morning. Now, the gentleman that called in and said that it would be costly for the upkeep of these buildings. Well, I think it would be rather more costly to have these buildings torn down and put a freeway through, which will do nothing. It will add nothing to the charm of the city. And you take it. If we tear down our buildings, then what's Halifax? It's just another city. And people who come to Halifax don't come because it's another city.
Mm-hmm.
They come just driving through Halifax. It's delightful to drive through Halifax, our old buildings, because they are scattered throughout Halifax, mainly down in the Hollis Street area. But they are
well,
scattered.
In Brunswick too. If you go through Brunswick, Garrish, Cornwallis area, and unfortunately, many of the old historic buildings have been allowed to deteriorate for a number of reasons, but there are some just gorgeous old buildings down there, the old West House and so on, which stands idle at the moment, and to me, a tremendous place for it could be an office for that matter, but just to preserve the building and to preserve the architecture, to me, is extremely important.
Well, it would be certainly worthwhile, and I think, perhaps if people call in this morning, who's like myself, I never really gave it much thought. It just never crossed my mind to even think about them. But I don't want to see them go. It would be a shame.
I wonder how many other people are perhaps like you who take for granted that they would never tear down these old historic buildings, and then we all wake up one morning and suddenly discover that we took something for granted that didn't occur, and they've gone.
Well, I'm sure that there's an awful lot of listeners who feel the same. And if they just call in and let everybody else know, because I think it would be a terrible thing to have these buildings torn down.
Right.
Okay?
Thanks for your call.
Okay, then.
Right,
bye-bye.
4.5 minutes after 9 on CJCH. 454-9308 is our telephone number, and we're talking about this morning historic buildings in Halifax, particularly in the waterfront area, the Privateers Warehouse, the Morse's Tea Building, and other old buildings with which many of you are familiar. There is a prospect that many of these buildings will disappear in years to come, unless we fight now, unless we establish a policy now in the city that this area is to be preserved and developed with those buildings intact, or most of those buildings intact, for the people, and not for some stupid expressway, and I call it stupid because the minute we start making decisions in favor of automobiles instead of residents or citizens of the community, then we're taking a backward step, in my opinion. It is our understanding, after doing a couple of quick telephone calls, that the old courthouse building on Spring Garden Road is to be taken over by Nova Scotia Tech, and that the inside will be remodeled to be used as offices, but the exterior will remain the same with that carved sandstone facade that it has, which is just gorgeous. It's 7 after 9. We take a call here. Good morning, Bill Ozard speaking.
Hello?
Yes.
Mr. Ozard?
Right.
I'm Timmy Redden, and I'm 10. And I think that they should be tearing down all the new buildings and the new roads and highways, and putting get some designers from France in there and make old-fashioned buildings.
Well, there's certainly a return to, although it would not perhaps be practical to tear down all the new buildings and new highways, etc., but many architects are returning to the old style. They're getting away from all that shiny aluminum and glass and are designing buildings that have a more historic look to them. And if you go down to, for instance, if you're ever go to Chester and have a look at the Morris Memorial Rink in Chester, it's all shingled. It's not like an ordinary rink that you think, a curling rink that you see with just the usual routine kind of front. This has cedar shakes on the side, or a style of cedar shake on the side, and it doesn't even look like a rink. And you can do this with other buildings too. Of course, it may be expensive in many cases, but I agree with you that we could look at the traditional architecture a lot more than we are.
Yeah, but I don't if they let them. I don't think they should let down the buildings. But if they want the roads, why can't they make them somewhere else?
Well, either that or yeah, that's right, or develop a better transportation system so a lot of people stop bringing their cars downtown, eh?
Yeah.
Right. Well, we thank you for your opinions today.
Okay.
Right. Bye-bye. Good morning, Bill Ozard speaking.
Yes, I'd like to have my say on this buildings.
Yes.
I think that Halifax is losing its attraction by tearing down all our buildings, and Dartmouth. I live in Dartmouth, matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as expressway is concerned, I think that's the last thing we need through the city. I think they've done too much now in putting roads through there. You can't get around. I think it's a shame that they're tearing down these buildings that they are.
I do, too.
I have a strong protest against that.
I do, too. I think it's just a tragedy. We're just continuing to support support the dream that there's nothing permanent anymore, and
Are we
darn it, there
in a
is.
world when speed is the only thing that's important?
Yeah, well, this is the attitude of some, I think.
I think it is, too, and be able to get around and speed through. And what they're doing in Halifax is making it hard to get around. It's not. I don't know if you're racing through, but if you want to go anywhere, you can't. I think it's just ruining the city. And as one person said this morning, the people come here because the city is different. Are we going to be just another huge city like San Francisco, New York, or Chicago? Is that what we're trying to be? Or are we going to be something unique?
Well, I believe we have an opportunity to grow and become a large city eventually, and still have a charm.
I have no objection to growth, but I don't think that speedway is the way to grow. We don't need speedways in the city. I have nothing against the improvement of highways in the province and making better highways, but we don't need expressways in the city. It's taking away the charm of the city. I think we should be getting up against this, not only in Halifax, Dartmouth as well.
Right.
So that's my opinion.
Good. Glad you called.
Right.
Right. Bye-bye. 14 minutes after 9 o'clock on CJCH. We have lines open. 454-9308 is the number to call. Do you care, honestly care, whether historic buildings are preserved or not in the city of Halifax? And when I say preserved, not just painted and left idle with nothing in them, but preserved in the point of view that the outside would be rehabilitated, but the old architectural style would remain, and the insides refurbished to make stores, offices, etc. And I think personally think it's important, but I don't want to ram my opinion down your throat, but I think that we should express our view on this. If you don't care, say so. Good morning, Bill Ozard speaking.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
I'm a tourist from Ontario. I've been tuned into your station.
Right.
I've been listening to your comments and your listeners' comments. On your historic buildings, like the waterfront, I went through here yesterday, I think, and I've seen some of these buildings. No, it's nice. They're lovely. I've seen your, what do you call Citadel Hill?
Citadel Hill, right? Mm-hmm.
That's a very nice spot. I enjoyed that view. But personally, your waterfront, if the people are going to have to pay for this, is it worth it?
Well,
is it
worth it from what point of view, sir?
Out of the working man's pocket.
No, the proposal at the present time is that it be developed privately by using private capital and so on. It's not a proposal, and I wouldn't support it either, that all city tax dollars be used to prime up those historic buildings. I think that we should try and attract private capital.
No. You're talking in my line that way, because like I come out of Toronto actually, and I see what happened to this great expressway we had where they were tearing down homes, and it was a flop, right? A lot of good people lost good homes for relatively nothing.
Right.
What I can see in Halifax, other than the Navy, the Navy is a big thing here, right?
Well, the armed forces are a fairly substantial contribution to the economy, no question about that.
In Toronto, 90% of the people I've met are Maritimers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if instead of really, we all need historic sites, some place to visit, but we need work down here. Why should the boys be in Ontario where maybe they all got their heart, they want to come back home? Give work to the boys here. Maybe give the work to the boys restoring all these old sites. That's fine. That'd be great. That'd be dandy.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. You're not...
Industry, you need.
Right.
You need industry, so maybe you need this expressway going through your city.
Well, I believe that we can do both. If we use care and we use thought and we don't rush into things, that we can develop industry for this particular area, but we don't, at the same time, destroy everything that's historic.
Right. You don't want Halifax to end up as another Toronto or Montreal.
That's right. Well, Montreal has its...
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Mm. But at the same time, you've got to think of the youth of the country. And without the youth, there is no country, right?
Right. Oh, I agree. Everything has to be done with balance and with common sense. You don't sacrifice everything for the sake of a few historic buildings. That's silly. But it seems to me that we can develop a balance here if we're careful. The Spadina Expressway, to me, is symbolic of a certain amount of stupidity. because what happened there was that if that thing had continued, they would have wiped out all kinds of family businesses, as you know, and you probably know Toronto much better than I. Many corner stores, groceries, etc., where that expressway was going to go through, many of them owned by immigrants and so on, the Italians, etc., who would have been virtually wiped out by this expressway, and most of them probably would have ended up in the welfare rolls. And to me, that's just one aspect of it.
No, but you're really taking the diehard aspect of the whole thing. If this expressway would have been allowed to continue, you think of all the industry would have followed further up.
Wowee! Toronto is starving to death now.
No, Toronto never starved to death.
Well, all right.
Other than choke themselves to death.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm not an Ontarian, and I'm just making an observation as a person who probably makes 4 or 5 trips a year to Toronto. That Toronto has an opportunity to preserve some of its beauty, and at the same time not get itself all choked up and snarled. But you've got to, you have to admit that Toronto has a lot of problems at the moment. And the Premier has stepped in and said, that's it, no more Spadina Expressway. They're going to develop rapid transit systems.
Yeah, sure. Premier stepped in, but was a little late, right?
Well, he's only been Premier for a couple of months, sir. You have to look back.
Okay, I shouldn't blame it on the Premier. This is very foolish on my part. But I'll get back to Halifax. Like you said yourself, we need historic sites. But keep industry in mind at all times, because you need industry very much.
Sure. Oh, yeah, I agree. I agree entirely.
Okay, thank you for hearing me out, and I still like your city.
Well, that's good, and we hope you have a pleasant holiday here, sir.
I am, sure am.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. 22 minutes after 9 o'clock on CJCH, 454-9308. If there are other tourists listening this morning who are visiting us from other provinces or from the United States, we welcome your call and comments about Halifax. We perhaps would be interesting to get some comments from tourists about historic buildings. You go to a city like Philadelphia, and we have many people who come to this province from Pennsylvania. The city of Philadelphia has made great efforts to preserve its historic tradition, and of course Philadelphia has tremendous historical significance to the United States, with the Liberty Bell there and many other historical things that really relate to the founding of America. And that city has made great efforts to preserve many of the things that relate to the history of the United States. And it would be interesting to hear if there are any tourists listening who have an opportunity this morning between now and 11 o'clock to give us a call, either from a paid telephone or from your hotel or motel or cottage, or if you're just driving along the highway and you spot a payphone and you want to call us collect, give us a call at 454-9308. We have lines open. We're talking about the preservation of historic buildings in Halifax and how important is it to you, and whether you think effort should be made to preserve as many of our historic buildings as possible in the proper context. I'm not, again, talking about the preservation of the building just for the sake of preserving it, but the practical use of these buildings by refurbishing the interior, redesigning the interior, if you will, but leaving the exterior as it is, but fixing it up so that it looks newer and in a good state of repair. So many of us drive through the city and we never look at the buildings that we pass by. And, of course, you don't want to do that steadily. Of course, you'll end up in somebody's trunk. But or a walk through the city and look at the buildings, look at the architecture and so on, in many of our older buildings. You don't see that anymore. And I think it would be a great tragedy, personally, to see that disappear over the horizon. 26 minutes after 9 o'clock on CJCH. Good morning, Bill Ozard speaking.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Ozard.
Yes.
I'm 14 years old, and I'd like to say that these old buildings don't mean anything to me. Why should they? I was never around when these buildings were really in use. But to the older people who lived in Halifax when they were young, these buildings were part of their childhood. It would be a real waste to tear them up. If they could
I find little fault with your reasoning. The mere fact that they weren't around, or you weren't around when the buildings were here, anybody is over 100 years, and there's nobody listening, I'm sure, who's over 100 years of age this morning. Let's wipe out all buildings based on that premise that are older than the population. We could set up a rotating system. As the Halifax's oldest citizen reached a certain age, we would destroy any buildings older than that. I'm being slightly facetious here, but I'm trying to make a point here. Do we not learn from history and appreciate history by preserving some of those things that were in existence at that time?
Yeah, but, our parents and my grandparents would remember it more than I would, Because you named the buildings off a while ago, and I didn't recognize any of them, but I'm sure my parents would, you know.
Well, no, I can appreciate the fact that perhaps young people of your age at this stage of their lives may not have a real sense of history or a real interest in things historical, but by the time you're 50 or 60, which isn't very far away, incidentally, it may seem like a long way away, but as you get older, you'll find that time goes faster, that maybe the buildings that are being built now, or say are only 20 or 25 years of age, that you are familiar with now as a young person, you may have a different attitude towards that building when you reach the age of 60 or 70, and those buildings which are relatively young now, start to become historical buildings. And I'm just wondering what your attitude might be. You can't answer that question, of course, but everything is relative. But, we could go on destroying on a cyclical basis because nobody relates to the buildings, which seems to me to be a bit of a tragedy.
Yeah, well, I hope that they do keep the buildings anyway. You know, I hope that they take a section of Halifax aside and put these buildings in it for, people to go and tourists and that. I think it would be great.
Have you ever been in the museums in Citadel Hill?
Yeah, I have. I think they're really nice. I've been in them quite a lot.
Right, and did you learn from the things that are displayed there, and learn about the kind of life our ancestors had?
Well, I guess I did, because at the time that I went up there, I was learning about it in school, the same thing, and, what I learned in school, I sort of remembered, when I went up to the Citadel Hill, and, I sort of understood it more because I had learned it in school.
Right. Have you ever been to ever been to our provincial museum, the Nova Scotia Museum on the corner of Bell Road and whatever street that is?
No, I don't think I've been there.
It's the new one, Summer Street, yes, where City Field used to be. I was in there for the first time fairly recently, and it's a magnificent building, and it has some magnificent historical things in it, of all types. It's still building, and it's still being developed. But I wonder how many other citizens have taken an hour or two out to go to our Nova Scotia Museum, which was a gift of the province of Nova Scotia. It's got a magnificent stagecoach right in as you go in, which has been preserved by a Nova Scotian and has been given to the museum for display purposes. And this was the traditional way of travel. If you wanted to go from Halifax to Windsor, not so long ago, you didn't hop in your car and go on a 4-lane highway, number 101. You got a stagecoach and you paid $6 or something, and you spent 6 hours or 7 or 8 hours getting to Windsor in a horse-drawn stagecoach. And I think we can all learn from the sacrifices and the things that people did 50 or 100 years ago. And if we ignore the contribution that people made, why should people in the future make pay any attention to the contributions that we make and that you will make when you get older?
Yeah, a lot of the people of Halifax don't get out to see these things, these museums. A lot of tourists have seen more things in Halifax than a lot of people have living in Halifax. I haven't seen that much in Halifax, but I've seen more in other places. I
met a man the other day who lives out about 40 miles outside of the city. He was in the city of Halifax for the first time in 25 years. 25. He's a native Nova Scotian who lives in a city or a town 40 miles from Halifax, and the other day he was here in the city, and it was the first time he was here in 25 years. How many other people know as little about their province and their capital city as this man might?
Oh, I imagine there's quite a few. Because I don't know that much. I know more about other places than I do about my own city. I'll admit that. I know that a lot of people do.
I think it's very important that we develop somehow, all of us as citizens, a sense of history of our city and the sense of tradition that our city has, not hang on to it to the bitter end, but grow and progress, but at the same time be constantly cognizant of our history. And because if you're cognizant of your history, you can control your future. If you just go headlong into the future without any thought about the past and the citizens and so on, boy, you can make an awful lot of terrible mistakes, I think.
Yes, I agree with you, I think. Well, thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Bye. 932 CJCH Radio Time, 454-9308 is our telephone number. And we'd like to hear from you today as we discuss the preservation of things historic, not only buildings, but homes, etc., and other things that have a historical value to our community and to our province. Good morning. This is the Action Line.
Hello.
Yes.
I'd like to talk about the building.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was in the new museum, and I think the things in there are just fantastic. And they should have lots more good buildings.
Well, so you would like to see the preservation of historic buildings, eh?
Yes, but inside the buildings, a little more modernized, so the buildings would keep.
Right, I think that's a good point to make, that the architecture of 150 years ago is now beginning to sag in many of these buildings. Much of it has to be improved. The buildings have to be strengthened to withstand any shocks or possible damage. They also have to be better fireproofed and made more safe for people. But I think that we could fix them up on the inside and still preserve the outside look.
Yeah, the outside.
Right.
But those new highways they're building are really unnecessary, because they could build a lot more things that we need than they build those worthless highways for.
Well, some highways, and many of our highways, of course, are great highways, particularly our provincial roads. I think that over the last 5 or 6 years we've seen some tremendous progress in the development of highways in this province. But I, quite frankly, as a relatively new citizen to Halifax, having lived only here for about 11 years, to see Halifax split up with reinforced steel and concrete bypasses and interchanges and overpasses and underpasses and all this kind of thing, it really bothers me that we're just pushing these kind of things through without any thought of what effect it's going to have on our city, and more importantly, what effect it's going to have on the people who live here. And I think this is very...
all moving out.
Well, we're getting to the point now, and we've got lots of examples in this country vis-a-vis Toronto and even Montreal, although Montreal has managed to retain some of its charm, particularly in the older quarter of the city, where the car seems to be king. Everything is for the car. The superhighways, the parking lots. Old historic buildings in Toronto are being torn down. They're being made into high-rise parking garages and all this kind of thing. And there's no balance anymore, and we've got to somehow get the cities back to the people instead of doing everything for the sake of automobiles, which is what we're doing now. And it's wrong. It's wrong because the car is obsolete. Why plan for the car now when in another 10 or 15 years, in my opinion, the automobile as a mode of transportation is going to become obsolescent. And I think that automobiles, as we presently know them, when you and I are 60 years of age or 70 years of age, which isn't that far away, we're going to look back and say, gee, I remember when everybody used to drive a car.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be driving cars because there isn't going to be any room for them. So let's, instead of planning for the day after tomorrow, let's look to the future a little bit.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments today.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Good morning. This is the Action Line.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
Listening to your program this morning, you were mentioning about the Morse Tea Building being one of those on the waterfront.
Right.
In St. John, New Brunswick, I believe the company has restored that same type of building. And
I believe you're correct. Yes, I recall that. Yeah.
It goes a lot like the colonial days thing they have every year.
Right, yeah. What do they call that? It's not colonial days. That's another name for it.
Pioneer days.
Or whatever it is.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to know this could be done along the same lines here.
Well, I think that we have somehow over the years lost our sense of tradition in this city, and I'm not again suggesting that we sacrifice everything for the good old days, because the good old days weren't all that good.
Sure.
But at the same time, I think that we could be looking at something like this, where we are at least have a day or a week or something along those lines where we are reminded of our history, like they do in St. John.
I've seen in
Loyalist Days, that's what it's called.
Place in Virginia, Williamsburg.
Yes.
It's really done up like this. The whole city has gone towards the theme, and they have a lot of houses and people in there acting as the colonialists did in the days of the war down there.
Right, and of course, Williamsburg has a tremendous
There's an awful lot of
history there. One of the original 13 colonies and one of the original seaports, as I recall, during the time of the 13 colonies. And I've not been to that city. I've seen photographs of it, and I understand it's a magnificent town.
Yeah, it's really nice the way they have it fixed up.
Right.
But, from traveling and living all across Canada, I'd say this is about the best place I've seen, for everything taken in effect.
Right. Are you from this area?
I was, yeah. And then I went away for 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I bounced around all over the place, and I'm back now. I hope I can stay.
Right. Have you seen? Be interesting to get your reaction to Halifax after being away from it for 11 years.
Well, I know. Like I normally live in Dartmouth.
Right.
But one thing I do find is they're talking about the superhighways that they need. I find it's a lot easier to go around here now than it was at that time. You know, just from one place to the other, more or less.
Right.
But I don't think they need any more, really.
Well, it seems to me that, we have, I agree with you, we've got some tremendous improvements in our transportation in the city. We've got a better transit system for openers. We've certainly got a better highway system. There are certainly areas that have to be improved and made better.
Yeah.
But my concern is that we're going to push too far and get into this, what I call the superhighway syndrome, and at the expense of the beauty of our city and at the expense of our citizens.
Yeah. Because I know out west, a lot of little towns, they have to bring trees in to plant them, you know. And it more or less seems here when they're trying to get rid of them because we got so many.
That's right. Well, that's one of our things that we're known for, is that Halifax is known as a city of trees. From the air, you can hardly see Halifax in some sections because it's so...
a lot of difference, you know, when you're comparing it to some other places.
Right. Good morning, this is the Action Line. Hello?
Hello!
Oh, my goodness, that's...
Bill!
Bird Elwood Kaiser.
Yeah, when you first answered me there, I was about as loud as clear-toned sound. Huh? How you doing now?
I'm well, and you?
Oh, well, Bill, I got a little bit of stomach trouble recently. I had the peptic ulcer where I keeps acting up a bit again and causing my wife and myself some consternation and worry about the exigencies of not only our checkered existence, but the ramifications of a bad stomach when a person is not terribly healthy. How you doing?
I'm fine. I'm sorry to hear that your stomach's been bothering. I thought a fellow like you, a very relaxed kind of guy, you wouldn't have an ulcer. But...
Well, I'm tougher than nails, Bill. You see, this was more biological than it was caused as a result of exertion and nervous strain.
I had excess stomach acid or something.
Yeah. Didn't have enough Tums into me tummy, huh? What you talking about this morning? Restoration, I understand, eh?
Yeah, historic buildings, right.
Yeah, well, I don't think they should demolish the waterfront there. I think they should leave them historic buildings, there. If they build an expressway, in my words, it would be going from history to hysteria.
That's not bad.
That's almost profound, ain't it?
It almost is, yeah.
Yeah, listen, I know somebody I'd like to restorate.
Who was that?
Oh, Bernice. It's too bad they don't restore women, huh? The foundation industry tries it, but they don't do so good. Well, she's getting up there now in years so badly that it would take Christian Barnyard and a whole team of doctors to get her straightened out. Eh?
Well, I didn't mean to laugh, Bert, but she's getting on, though, is she? She losing her shape?
Well, she's getting a bit saggy where she should be voluptuous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The women get like that.
Yes, they do.
They say they're like age, eh? They're like wine, they improve with age. Eh?
Do they?
Well, not only that, but the older they get, the harder it is to court them. Eh?
That's not bad either.
Yeah, well, listen, you know what the Chronicle Herald's doing now on its front page, eh?
No, what are they doing?
Saying, what have you done for Nova Scotia today?
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
Yeah,
What do you
well, last week what I did for Nova Scotia was I went to New Brunswick. I went up to Moncton.
Yeah? Was that another load of manure, was
Another
it?
load of manure.
Uh-huh.
Eh? Put it on the back of me. I got myself a new U-Haul.
A new U-Haul?
Yeah. You see, there was a feller I know runs a rental agency out there by the old Wellington airport, and he had one for sale, and I needed something upon which to drag me manure, so I bought it.
Yeah?
From this feller.
Is it working good?
Sure.
Good.
Sure. Well, look, Billy, I'll let you go.
All right.
And you know what they say in the trade?
No, what trade?
Keep the baby faith. Thanks for calling, Bill.
Okay,
Yeah,
Bert.
bye now.
Bye. Well, that's our weekly visit from Bert Elwood Kaiser, our resident Riverport philosopher. We'll say good morning. Bill Ozard speaking.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to speak about the historic buildings.
All right.
And as I was saying, you thought perhaps the people were not so much interested. But as you know, the Heritage Trust, to which I belong, they have more and more members. I think it's up to nearly 400 now, who are very much interested. And that to have this expressway, of course, would be ridiculous. And to have these buildings restored, I think, as someone was saying, that they had offers from Canada and even from the United States. And that we should have it and have it as an art center and boutiques and other things in there, and it would be a great tourist attraction. And as you know, the Heritage Trust is dedicated to this sort of thing, and the other few weeks we went through the province to see these buildings through the province as well, and we feel that they should be backed up in every way to anyone who is interested in doing this thing, be backed up by the citizens and be alert. Perhaps the reason that more people are not speaking this morning is that they just didn't listen to the program or doing something else and didn't realize what was on. But I assure you that very many people in Halifax, I would say perhaps the majority in a way, would like these buildings saved and not to have all this concrete, as you say, and this sort of thing, because it's ruining the place. And we certainly do want to have these things preserved, and I know other people that don't realize it just now, as one person said, will in a little while later see the value of it.
What, I'm curious, you mentioned that your organization recently had a province-wide tour of historic buildings. Are there other buildings in the province, historic buildings, that are under threat of disappearing?
Oh, yes, of course, some private people are restoring them. And now the Ellis House, do you know that, for instance?
No, I don't. I'm not familiar with that one.
Those people that came over from Germany, they were really refugees, I don't know, but he's an engineer. Well, they restored that place, and it was, it's a beautiful thing. You ought to see it sometime. And it's a large estate. And of course, the Heritage Trust, we take tours different places through the province and, in fact, cover it. And we're going to Louisbourg, I think, for see the fort, perhaps in August or something. But they do have their eye on this, and they are restoring things through a lot of these buildings. They show that we go through sometimes before they're restored, just partially started, and then see them after. And it's really amazing what's being done, the interiors.
Does the Heritage Trust itself undertake any restoration, or do you just encourage it through private?
No, the Heritage Trust, they have some money, we have to pay for and then other people give money to it. We have to pay the dues, and they've got quite a bit of money, and they've done quite a bit in restoring things and helping things in Halifax and in other places too through the province. There was a church that was restored, not so long ago in different places. You want to find out what's called I was going to say the officers, the president and so forth, and just see what is being done. You'd be surprised.
Right, I'm wondering, I wonder how many people are really aware that the Nova Scotia Heritage Trust ever even existed.
Well, of course, first there were very few, but now, as I say, they all come out of the woodwork when we have tours, and there are about, I think, nearly 400 listed now as members. We had a meeting in the Red Room at the Province Building not so long ago, and it was packed.
Right. Now, if there were people interested in finding out more about the Nova Scotia Heritage Trust, to where do they write, or to whom could they phone?
Oh, they could phone to, Mr. Collins is one that's very much interested, is very much the head of it, and I was trying to think of his name, the president now, Mr. It's just escaped me. It's ridiculous, for it to escape. I could give it to you again. But any of the officers and members, I say, would be only too pleased to...
Do you have a postal address, or we could give?
The secretary has. Now, I haven't got it. I would have to look it up just now. I wouldn't want to keep you. But there is an address where the secretary would take things. And then, the Skidinskis, perhaps you heard of them on English Street that have restored that old Sawyer house.
Yes, right.
And if you got Mrs. Skidinski is one of the members, too, one of the officers on the board. If you got in touch with them, they could tell you, too. You know them, don't you? You know how to get in touch with them.
Right. I think we'll be talking also to Mr. Collins, perhaps before the program is out, and I'll ask him the question so we can get the information from him directly.
Yes, and, I was trying to think of the one that's so ridiculous. Sometimes things will just go from you. But anyway, if you can get in touch with him, he's one of the relatives, I think, at the old Collins building, down there on one of those streets, Hollis Street or something. And I think if you can get in touch with him, it would be very good. He'd be able to tell you, because he's really the one that's going right through with this thing, was telling me the other day about how different ones have offered, were interested, even through Canada and the States for these buildings down in Water Street.
Right.
Lou Collins on,
yeah, we have his number. We have his office number here. We'll be contacting him shortly.
Yes, he's in the historic sites.
Right. Well, we thank you for taking time to speak with us this morning.
Not at all. I'm pleased, and I'm glad that so many people are interested, and I'll assure you that many, many more than are calling are really back of it.
Right. Good.
Thank you.
Thanks for your call. Bye-bye. With us on the line now and on the program is Mr. Lou Collins, a man who's fought long and hard for the preservation of historical buildings, etc. Lou, perhaps I appreciate the fact that you're extremely busy this morning. Perhaps in capsule form, if you will, give us what you think is at issue in connection with the waterfront.
Well, I think, Bill, and I want to say first that I appreciate the time the station has taken this morning to review this issue, because I think this in itself is very important, very useful, that citizens have a chance to not only hear, but to discuss the issue. And just in connection with one or two points of fact, the Heritage Trust has an office at 1815 Hollis Street.
Right.
And there is a telephone number there, 422-5564. Now, the telephone company has misspelled the word heritage, but it's the trust is listed in the new telephone book. And Mr. Alan Duffus, the local architect, is presently president of the Heritage Trust. I think the issue at the moment is the preservation of enough of the best of the past that can be made useful in the present, so that we have some sort of anchor. We're moving at such a speed, as I was talking to one of the local service clubs just this week, and I think that we have to take the attitude that the business of history is rather like an engineer's transit, that we have to look back and take a bearing every so often, or that we can go in a straight line ahead. And this is one reason why we're pressing that at a time when we haven't yet properly assessed our architectural and historical heritage, that we ought not to rush about tearing it down, because this isn't the sort of thing you can fabricate again.
Right.
And at the present moment, for example, the federal government is involved in the second year of a 10-year inventory of all of the buildings in Canada and its territories. And that is being run through a computer at the present time in order to shake down the buildings of the first priority. And in the meantime, the communities across Canada are being urged to do the very best on their own. We, example, will be having a priority list of landmarks going to council at the end of this month. We've been working on it now for nearly a year, and that will be going to council for their designation, and it includes the buildings that Haligonians recognize first. Individual members of the Halifax Landmarks Commission were asked to submit lists, and then my vice chairman, Professor Waite of Dalhousie, and I screened the lists and developed a completed list of approximately 24 structures and sites, so that we're trying to, if you like, hold the situation at the moment until civic planners and civic developers and engineers can be given the opportunity to assess whether they should simply bulldoze everything and build new, or whether we ought not to try, as certainly some of us believe, to incorporate the best of the past in a renewed city.
Right.
And I think the Halifax Visitors and Convention Bureau's theme of blending history and the future is a very good one. And I've worked with the Junior League and the Visitors and Convention Bureau in developing a walking tour. A tourist earlier this morning wondered what to do in Halifax. There is an Old Town walking tour available at the Visitors and Convention Bureau, which would occupy at least 2 good hours of such a tourist's time and put him in the heart of the city. And we have a number of projects immediately going forward. We have very considerable interest about the proposal on the waterfront to renew the life of a group of waterfront buildings, perhaps as our development people and the developers themselves. Even in our local School of Architecture, there's been a very considerable change within the last half dozen years, and some of the best documentation, incidentally, of historical buildings has been carried out by the Nova Scotia School of Architecture, the Nova Scotia Technical College. They have managed to, I was looking in our files at the Landmarks Commission office just the other day, and they've managed to record, for example, the Octagon building in Dartmouth in a very fine way, a detailed photographic and architectural study of it as one of their projects. And I would think that the change has come in our development thinking. We're thinking approximately 20 years behind the times in the light of what's happening across America. Yeah. But in our architectural and in our planning, even the Metro Center report produced by MAPSI has a much more enlightened look at central city development than we've had. They asked, for example, for a whole section on historical buildings or historical precincts in the central city core, which I was able to supply to consultants, and that's incorporated in the Metro Center report. So our planners and our architects have advanced, but I think our development picture hasn't advanced in the same way. And our engineers haven't advanced. We had the unprecedented action of the provincial government in Ontario stopping the Spadina Expressway. And we're faced with the same thing with our own Harbour Drive, and that was due to have been discussed in May. It's still there haunting us, and I've warned the members of the Landmarks Commission that it's there in the background of our own development of the waterfront buildings, and Haligonians are going to have to choose. And I can see a change in sentiment locally in the matter of the great sacrifices we've made to the motor car. We've invented something that's becoming our master, I'm afraid.
That's right, in air pollution and everything else. I realize you have to dash off. One question before you go. How many buildings are in jeopardy in the Harbour Drive proposal? That is, how many historic buildings do you see in absolute jeopardy?
Well, if we were to go to some of the original conceptions of Harbour Drive, this could damage, as it was made clear at the time, could damage the waterfront buildings. Now, we've held the line there and fought a long battle on that score, but it's the ramifications of the drive, too. For example, a ramp coming off the interchange proposed for Cornwallis Street, which is an over and under, with Barrington Street going over and Cornwallis Street going under. A ramp coming off that could endanger a whole section of Brunswick Street, just as in the initial discussions of the interchange at North Street, the recreation area and around the George Dixon recreation area was endangered. And as a result, the citizens of Brunswick Street, the priests and the nuns and the ministers, all went to City Council, where they were told that nothing like this would ever have passed, but it was there in conceptual form on plans. So that very often when you put a throughway along, it's the roads that lead off it, the commitments that may be a block away that one has to watch out for.
Right.
And I was looking at a newspaper clipping just recently concerning the Cogswell Street interchange when the newspaper, as a result of the information received, said there would be no lights on the interchange. And you can see that this isn't the way things work out.
Right.
So we have to make some decisions about whether a city is going to be a habitation for man or whether it's going to be a roadway for a motor car.
Lou, we appreciate, I'm sure many of the citizens of Halifax and many more as a result of this program, hopefully, appreciate the fight that you and Gil and many of the others are putting up to preserve some of our buildings, and you have our support in your battle.
Well, we appreciate the support that's growing among citizens for a second look.
Thanks very much, Lou.
Good. Thanks.
Right, bye-bye. Lou Collins of the Nova Scotia Heritage Trust and the Halifax Landmarks Commission. And those of you who would like to find out more about the activities of the Nova Scotia Heritage Trust, which is in existence to preserve those buildings of historical significance, it's the Nova Scotia Heritage Trust, 1815 Hollis Street, and the telephone number is 422-5564. If you'd like to perhaps find out more about them, they may have brochures or documentation available to you for study that you would like to read. 422-5564, and the current president is Mr. Alan Duffus, well-known Halifax architect. Good morning, this is the Action Line.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
Hi.
How are you?
I'd just like to comment on what a gorgeous city you've got here. You ought to be proud of it.
Well, I think many citizens are. I don't think that some citizens are as prideful of their city as they should be.
Yeah. Yes, I really think it's gorgeous. The thing that really impresses me about the city is the trees. I'm a tourist, you see.
Right.
And I come from New York. And, New York, the big city and skyscrapers, but you come down here and it's really nice, trees, and I really think you should be proud of it.
Are you visiting here now, or just on vacation, or are you living here and a former resident of New York? Or?
Oh, yeah, I'm a vacationer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, camping.
Right. How long have you been here?
Oh, I've been here about 2 weeks now.
Right. Do you, as a New Yorker, like the city of New York?
Well, it's all right, Lots of people gripe and groan and how it's a big city and there's too much going on, It's good because there's a lot of activity, but it's nice to be down in a nice, quiet city like this, Quiet and it's awful nice.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be nice when you retire or, if you're young, it'd be nice to live here because it's quiet and, it's not too quiet, but it's very nice.
Well, we haven't been yet overtaken by the automobile, such as larger cities like, our own. We have Toronto, Montreal, and like big, large American cities like Chicago and New York, where everything is, if you don't, the automobile is everywhere, and the exhaust fumes are everywhere, and the interchanges are everywhere.
Yep.
Right. Well, we hope you have a pleasant stay here, and we thank you for your compliments and your comments.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye-bye. We have lines free at the moment. If you'd care to comment on our subject this morning, should we be preserving historic buildings and homes in our community and elsewhere in the province? Do you feel that it's important? What is more important to you? What are the priorities? Is an expressway through the center of the city more important, or are the preservations of historic buildings more important, or a balance between the two? We seek your comments and opinions at 454-9308. Good morning, this is the Action Line.
Morning, Bill.
Yes, sir.
Regarding historical sites, I think Mr. Lou Collins, deserves credit over the years. He's trying to restore what the present generation hadn't any idea about. Architecture of the past. And I think that you take the tourist trade. They don't come here to look at used blocks of concrete. They come here for something individual like art and museums and fish plants and different things of interest and historic sites. And you take the Sam Sick House at Windsor, Judge Halliburton's house up there, and the Grand Pré, things of interest. And the young people, I think, today should be taken around to these places and try to show them the things of the past and what the change has done. We've turned from real art, I think, to blocks of concrete and high-rise and all that. It has its place. But to overcrowd the cities with these things, people will be moving away instead of coming in.
Right.
And I think it's very important that we keep. And there was a place in Boston, I think it was up in the States or somewhere, where they turned a small town into a historic site and restored some of the old conditions. And you'd be surprised what tourist trade they brought in.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, you take when we were growing up, young fellas, watching a blacksmith shoeing a horse and perhaps getting kicked out the door with the horse. And things like that. I'd spend hours watching a blacksmith making horseshoes and turning the red hot iron from the anvil. and things like that. I think our present generation is losing much in the value of life and learning those things. And I think with people coming in to restore those buildings at very little expense to the city, I think it's a good thing to encourage.
Right.
Okay, Bill?
Thanks for your call, sir.
Thank you.
Right, bye-bye. Good morning, this is the Action Line.
Mr. Ozard?
Yes.
Well, I came to talk on about the buildings.
Right.
And I don't think it's very smart at all to tear down these old buildings. Although I'm not from Halifax, but I come in the summertime for about 2 weeks with my friend, and even if I don't have very much money, I like going and looking at the old buildings and things like this, and I wouldn't want them to be torn down at all.
Right. Why do you think we should keep them?
Well, I don't have much money to shop, but I like coming and look at them. And I'm from the valley, and they have lots of old buildings, and I just like looking at them. And, well, old people like them also, and I just wouldn't want to tear them down.
Right. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for your call.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Well, we have time for one more call on the Action Line. Good morning, Bill Ozard speaking. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Good morning.
Yes, ma'am.
Bill, have you ever been down by Newport, Rhode Island?
No, I haven't.
Well,
No.
we were down there a couple weeks ago, and we toured some of their historical homes down there.
Right.
And they're really gorgeous. And they have a group tours, and they have 3 or 4 houses that you can go in if you want to take the whole 4 houses. And they're right reasonable. And they're just gorgeous to view. I tell you, one home we were into was the Vanderbilt summer residence.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
And another place we went down there was in Providence. They have an old battleship down there. And it was from the Second World War. And you take your children and you go on tours on that. And when you go aboard, they give you these headphones. And as you pass each point on the ship that they have marked out, on the headphones you hear what actually would be taking place during a battle of the sea.
Right.
And that's quite interesting. And I think if our Navy here ever wants to get rid of an old ship, and they could set it up something like that, and it would draw tourists, because I know there was quite a lineup when we went down, and it was quite interesting. So I think I'm all for the Historical Society of preserving the old homes.
Good.
And that. So that's what I have to say this morning, then.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, then.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, my friends, that's all the time we have for the Action Line for this Wednesday, the 21st day of July, and we thank you very much for your interest, and may we just ask you again to be constantly conscious of our historic heritage and our buildings, and to make your views known to your aldermen if you are concerned about the preservation of historic buildings. And those of you who may have the time and the opportunity, it's to be discussed at City Council tonight.